Rogers, and I'm here for our fourth installment of the Motivational Interviewing webinar, or as I like to say it, how to stop wrestling with your patients and start dancing. I hope some of you have already started dancing. I also want to apologize a little bit for my voice. I have a cold, and so I sort of sound, at least in my head, very nasally. So here we go. So here are the learning objectives of the overall webinar. We want to introduce you guys to the concepts of motivational interviewing, describe the key techniques of MI, open-ended questions, rolling with resistance, reflective listening, and eliciting change talk, which we're going to talk about today. We also want to spark an interest in you guys taking a more in-depth course in MI. So here we are with our fourth installment. And so did anybody try reflective listening? I see a couple of my friends, Linda and Marianne and Carol, Brady, a couple of you guys on the call. If you want to chat in, if anybody tried any reflecting back with their friends or patients or colleagues, chat into the chat box. We'll come back to this a little later if need be. And here's the agenda of what we're going to do today. So as you guys have realized that I like to do a little repetition here. So we're going to go over a little bit of the basics of MI, open-ended questions and reflections, and then we're going to dive in for the next 20 minutes to discuss really how you develop the discrepancy with your patient and identify change talk, which is when you hear change talk with the patient that you know that they're moving to making a change. And then we're going to open it up for any questions if you have. Okay, so now we're going to go back with a little short refresher on what we covered over the last 3 weeks. Motivational interviewing is a patient-centered guiding style for enhancing motivation to change by exploring and resolving ambivalence. So those key words are in bold: patient-centered, enhancing motivation, and resolving ambivalence. Ambivalence is a good thing. We also talked about how this is a shift in how we communicate with our patients. It's more guiding versus directing, less focused on fixing and persuading, and more focused on seeking understanding and collaboration. We see the patient as experts on themselves, and I'll pause here for a second because this is a key thing. We often think in healthcare that we have to have all the answers to the patient's issues. We don't. We're called on to make sure we get the correct diagnosis, of course, but oftentimes when we think about behavior change, we don't have to have all the answers. The patient really does. We just have to figure out how to get those answers out of the patient. We also want to accept that patients' ambivalence and fluctuations are normal. And lastly, as I keep saying, any progress is progress, and relapse is not a failure but a learning opportunity. And a few weeks ago, we talked about using open-ended questions to get the conversation started and using no more than 2 of the 3 of these questions before you move on to understanding more about the patient's reluctance or resistance to change. So open-ended questions do the following. It gets the ball rolling. It can't be answered with a yes or a no. It uses the patient's own words, and it's not biased or judgmental. We talked about comparing these closed-ended questions here. Did you have a great vacation? Are you depressed? Is your job doing okay? To these open-ended questions. Tell me about your vacation. Help me understand how you were feeling. What's going on with your job? What connection, if any, do you see between drinking soda and your diabetes? And again, this concept here is really important. It's helped me understand why it's important to do both of these things. We've talked over the last few weeks about comforting the afflicted, expressing empathy, really listening, and now it's time to afflict the comfortable. I'll say that again, to afflict the comfortable. This is where we need to move to behavior change by developing that discrepancy between what the patient's ultimate goals are and what they're doing in their daily action that may be in direct contrast to their values and goals. And when you develop that discrepancy, the patient's going to start to feel like, oh, wait a minute, I'm doing this every day, but that's not really what I value. And you can potentially start to see a move right there. We talked about the essence of motivational interviewing with rolling with resistance, using that reflective listening, and then finding meaning for the change. And that's what we're going to be doing today. But before we jump into the change talk, let's review a little bit about last week's reflective listening. So Emily, did anybody chat in?
Yeah, it looks like Marianne Quinn chatted in that she did do some reflections this past week.
And Marianne, did you want to, we can either unmute you if you want and you can speak, or do you want to chat in how it went? So we just unmuted you if you want to chat or talk.
Hi, Tori. It's Marianne. Can you hear me?
Not hearing you, so maybe it's on our end. But Emily, I know that you did a little bit this week of that batting practice that I did with you. How did it go? How did you feel about that?
So for those of you on the call, I had the opportunity to do some reflective listening with Tori, and where she threw out a bunch of different scenarios. And I'll tell you, in the beginning, I found that it was really challenging in that if it was a short statement, I had a harder time kind of coming up or trying to tease out like what I was hearing.
Yeah.
But when you opened it up to kind of a little bit longer dialogue, or it gave me an opportunity to be kind of really trying to listen for those feeling words, to be able to tease out kind of a little bit with more confidence of what I was hearing. And it got easier as we went through it. The first one, I laughed a lot.
The first one she did.
But I did get through it.
And, I have to tell you, though, on my end, because I was bringing up some real issues, on my end, it felt like you were really listening to me. You were validating my feelings and hearing my emotions in there, and it felt really good. So let's see.
It looks like that folks could hear Marianne. I'm not sure why we couldn't on our end, but it sounds like Marianne wrote in that you used reflections when you were presenting at a mentor-mentee training. And also with patients that you've been talking with. So sounds like you've had quite a bit of practice this past week.
That's fantastic, Marianne. That's great. And always with technology, right, Em? Yeah. So they can hear Marianne, but we can't. Yeah. So, okay. What's been brought up, I think, are some great feedback on a lot of the points that we covered last week. So you remember, reflective listening keeps the ball rolling. Open-ended questions gets the ball rolling, and reflective listening keeps the ball rolling. So it's a statement and not a question. A reflection finds meaning in the statement, ends with something called downturn. Your voice goes down. It builds rapport and keeps the patient thinking and talking, affirms and validates, and can do something called hypothesis testing. Basically, it would be something like a statement like this. If I understand you correctly, it sounds like you're frustrated that you can't afford fresh vegetables. And again, it's more effective than questions. There we go. And so here are some of these what we call universal safe reflections here. And as you improve, we talked about adding some meaning to the reflections and truncating a little bit to say you're not ready to start exercising. You're having a problem with setting limits with your child. Here we took a situation, instead of asking questions, which may be very comfortable to lots of us, we tried reflections to get more information. And so you can see here are the questions, and then we made the reflections right here. And again, reflective listening really adds value to the statement. It adds information plus that empathy and understanding. We also talked that sometimes you can overshoot an emotion, right? And so here in this statement, we talked about, I never see my daughter. She's up in her room all the time. She eats there. She's not eating healthy food. She's on her phone. And we could say the question could be, how did that make you feel? Versus the reflection could be, you're sad about that. We also talked about if I had said, you're furious with your daughter, that mom might have come back and said, actually, I'm not furious with her. She's a really good kid. And from that overshooting, you might find out a lot more information about some of the positive attributes that the mom feels about her daughter. And we played ball last week. And so I did some batting practice, which is a great way to practice reflections. Em did it for about 5, maybe 10 minutes yesterday. And you heard when I did it, I didn't always hit a home run. In fact, I mostly just got the ball on the bat. But last week, both Nicole and Emily said that they felt like I made a connection with them, and they felt that their issues had been heard. And I also wanted to remind you there's a framework that we use with MI, because sometimes when we talk about MI, it can get kind of esoteric and lots of different words, change talk, reflective listening, and there's a framework that we use to have the conversation. You explore and you do exploring and understanding. We're gonna talk today about the 4th and 5th bullet there, building rapport and expressing empathy and pros and cons. The next piece, you're going to do guiding. We're going to talk about that today too, which is the importance and confidence, values and strengths. And then you choose. You try to get the patient to elicit some change talk and is setting goals. We'll get into a little bit of that today, and then we'll finish with that next week. Now moving on toward change. This is a great quote from the philosopher Pascal, and he said, "We are usually convinced more easily by reasons we have found ourselves than those which have occurred to others." And this is so true. As I said earlier, we don't have to have all the answers. Usually the patients have them. We just need to understand where they're coming from. We need to listen to them, and we need to try to work to get the patient to state why he or she wants to change. Excuse me. We can help show them the how, but we only provide that kind of advice if they ask us to do that, or if we ask them and get permission to do that. So this is interesting. So if Pascal and others will tell us that the motivation needs to come from within, here's some weak whys or weak motivations. I'm doing it because I feel guilty. I feel pressured. Somebody else has convinced me to do it. I'm not sure I really want to, and I'm not really sure I can. So if you're hearing somebody say, I've got to run every morning because I feel so guilty because I eat so much, that's not a really good, strong indicator that they're going to be successful. Or I feel pressured by my doctor, so I better eat healthy foods. Or my husband's making me do this. Those are not good whys. These are stronger whys. Excuse me. I'm doing it because I decided to. I'm doing it because it's important for me to cook healthy for my family. I'm doing it because I have the ability to do so. And we're going to talk a lot about this, the importance and the confidence to do something. So you might ask, how will I know that my patient is ready to make a change? They'll do this thing that we've already talked about called change talk. And in the MI world, change talk is a very MI thing. And when I've done more courses, when I do the courses on MI, I find I almost learn a whole new vocabulary. So this change talk is an MI kind of phrase. You're going to have to listen for it. But it's the cue that the patient is ready to start thinking about the how of the change. So here's the framework. When you start to hear these kinds of words coming from your patient, you know they're ready to start really thinking about a change. So the desire to change. If you hear something from your patient like, I wish I could get more exercise. I like the way I feel after exercise. That's a really powerful thing. They've got a desire there. Or you might hear them talk about their ability to change. In the past, I was able to run in the morning, they might say, or they might say something like, I think I could cook a meal at home once a week or so. When you hear those kinds of words, again, change talk. You might also hear the reasons to change. They may say something like, I know that fast food isn't healthy for my son. That's powerful. If they know that something isn't healthy, that's really powerful. Or they might say, I'm worried my daughter will get diabetes. You also might hear the need to change, a statement like this. I need to get more exercise or else I might have to go on blood pressure medications. That's a strong, powerful change talk. They might also say, I really must set limits on screen time for my children. You also might hear commitment to change. I'm ready to start feeling better. I'm going to try to buy more fruit. And when you hear change talk, bingo, it's developing discrepancy right there. And discrepancy is your best friend because motivation to change occurs when a person perceives the discrepancy or conflict between their behavior and what's really important to them in life. Meaning if health is really important, the health of their kids are really important, but yet they're starting to see going to McDonald's every night is really in contrast to the things that they believe. And that's what we want to start to do. We want to start to develop this discrepancy. So there are many ways to do it, but I'm going to go over a couple of them. And here's the pros and cons. I think probably everybody knows about pros and cons, and we've probably all done our own pros and cons list for maybe a vacation you want to take or something you want to buy, or maybe your kids have done it for college. So here's how we as providers can help the patient develop their own pros and cons list. We can ask a few questions like this. Could you tell me something about what you like about eating at McDonald's after softball practice? This was a real one in my family. Softball. Don't even get me going on softball. But when my daughter played softball, we got into this habit of going to McDonald's all the time. So this is a real example for me. again, you could start off by saying, could you tell me something you like about eating at McDonald's after softball practice? Or you might say, what things are not so good about eating fast food? What might happen if you don't go to McDonald's after softball practice? How would changing eating at fast food restaurants affect your family? Again, these kinds of questions, these open-ended questions, will help elicit that discrepancy. And here's one that I really like. So, Tori, on one hand, you really like the convenience of eating at McDonald's. It's quick, it's easy, the kids like it. On the other hand, you know it's not the healthiest food for your kids. So right then in that statement, on one hand, on the other hand, you put it in the patient's lap, the discrepancy right there. Now, remember in the beginning of this section on motivation for change, we talked about how important it is that it's the patient's motivation for change, and that once you find the patient's motivation, that's the biggest indicator for success and for change. It's not our motivation to get them to be healthier. Even though our voice as healthcare providers is important, but our motivation shouldn't be the sole thing that we're looking at. It's also not, as I said, the biggest indicator of success. So to get to the patient's motivation, we need to try to figure out what the patient's values and strengths are. And I know some of you might be thinking, really seriously, Tori, this is a well child visit and I'm not a social worker. They're really good at this. How am I going to get to some of these things? Well, there's some quick ways to get there. And I will also tell you, understanding a patient's values, what they think are really important, and their strengths and their abilities is so worth taking an extra 2 to 3 minutes. So I'm going to review a couple things about this. So when we talk about importance and confidence, importance is tied to the patient's or a person's values. Their confidence is tied to their strengths. So what they feel is important is their value. So the example, eating healthy foods is really important to me. That's a value that I have, being healthy. The confidence is my strength. So I feel pretty confident about that because I've learned how not to go to McDonald's, and I've learned how to use frozen vegetables, and I'm confident about that. Developing the discrepancy between the values and their action is where you're going to get to that change talk, and then matching their strength to their goals. So here's another technique which helps get to the patient's values and strengths, and Emily's going to help me with this one. So the next 2 slides are about the importance and confidence rulers. Some of you might have heard about this. Many practices actually have a ruler, and at Let's Go we had a ruler. I think it was probably about 12, wasn't 12 inches. It was a longer, big ruler, but it was a very brightly colored piece of paper that providers were using to have this conversation. So here how it's going to work. Emily is going to talk about some behavior she'd like to change, and then I'm going to walk her through this. So do you have something, Emily?
I do.
Okay.
So my behavior that I would like to change is actually for my son.
Okay.
And I would really like to work with him to reduce the amount of time he spends on his iPad.
Okay, great. Now we're not going to go through reflective listening and open-ended questions right now, but I would probably do all of that and then we get to this phase. So, okay, Emily, on a scale of 0 to 10, with 10 being the highest number, how important it is for you to change Gideon's time that he spends on his iPad?
Yeah, it's pretty important. I would say probably about an 8.
An 8. So why didn't you choose a lower number like a 5?
I didn't choose a lower number because, I think given the work that I do and I know what the evidence says around screen time, it's pretty important to me. We value healthy behaviors in our family, and this is the one area where I think we struggle. So that's why it's pretty important.
Okay, so that's why you chose an 8. So what Emily was just telling me is her values there. So why didn't you choose a higher number like 9 or 10?
Well, I didn't choose a 9 or a 10 because I also know that, Gideon is a very healthy kid, and he eats well, and he gets a lot of exercise, and, he also gets a lot of joy from using his iPad. So it's kind of hard to want to push it even more when I know it makes him happy.
Right, so there are other priorities and other aspects of things that are important to you. Okay, very good. So so that was the importance, so I was able to figure out some of the things that are important to Emily and her family around this. Now on to confidence. So on a scale of 0 to 10, assume you want to change, how confident are you that you're going to be able to change Gideon's behavior around the iPad use? Again, 10's the highest.
Okay, I think confidence would probably be about a 6.
A 6. So tell me why you didn't choose a lower number, like a 3 or a 4.
Well, the reason I would pick a 6 is because, you know, he's a really good kid and he's a great listener, and we've had experience with, you know, just a little bit of education around certain things. He is pretty good at listening to what we're asking of him, so I feel pretty confident that he would reduce his screen time if we asked him to.
Great. So she's showing me some of the strengths that you have, some of the abilities that you have. So you chose a 6. Why didn't you choose I don't know, a higher number like an 8 or something?
Because I guess it kind of gets almost back to the importance piece. Like he enjoys doing it, and I think the confidence around this is probably more on me in that I want to see him happy, and I see when he is doing his block craft and creating things on his iPad, it makes him happy. So that's probably why the confidence is more in me as a parent.
Right. And so what I also heard, so by going to why it wasn't an 8, we were trying to get Emily to show some of the barriers, and some of the barriers were there that you don't want to make Gideon unhappy.
Yes.
You don't want to make it an uncomfortable place at the home when he's having fun on his iPad. You don't want to have discord.
Yes.
Okay. Great. So that's how the importance and confidence ruler goes. It only can take 2 or 3 minutes, and it helps you really understand a little bit. Because if somebody is, like Emily, on this note, if this was this example that Emily used, I wouldn't need to have to spend any time talking to her about screen time and why it's bad or potentially bad for Gideon to be on his iPad a lot, because she already knows that's important. What we might need to focus on is a little more around some ways that she's going to make a change. Versus if she had said that the importance was like a 4, then I might need to bring out some more information about the new AAP guidelines on screen times. So, excuse me here. So, there we go. So, and as you saw, I used these 3 questions to really start to elicit that change talk in Emily. Why didn't you choose a lower number? And what you do right then is talk about the benefits. So when I had each of these for the importance and confidence, she'd pick high numbers, and I just wanted to know why it wasn't a lower one. And there, what she's telling me is the benefits or how important something is to her. And why you didn't choose a higher number, she's telling me some barriers that she has around that. And the third one I didn't get to, but I'll ask it now, Em. What would it take to get you to a higher number?
Oh, wow.
You know, so we just talked about the 6. You said your confidence was around a 6. What would it take to get you to that 8?
I think it would take identifying other activities that bring Gideon as much joy as his using the iPad.
Great.
That's what it would take.
Awesome. Have you thought about any of those?
We have tried. We've tried exposing him to lots of different activities, and we haven't quite found that the one yet. But we're willing to keep trying.
So it sounds like it's important to you. It sounds like in the past you've tried some different things, but it hasn't really worked out the way you want.
Right.
I wonder what you're going to do.
I think I'm going to have to talk with Gideon and see what he is interested in trying, and go from there, see what he has to say about it.
Wow, so I didn't come up with that. So Emily came up with that, and that's what this third question does. It gets you the solutions. So, wow. So Em's feeling pretty comfortable. She's got a path forward. Yep. Okay, a couple more minutes here. So here are some things called change talk reflections. So we get the reflections from last week into change talk. You'll see them here. I don't need to read them. The last one has been really helpful to me over the years. I wonder what you'll do. It's just an interesting thing. I just wonder, you know? I just wonder. And then what Em did is then she was able to say, I don't know, maybe I'll talk to Gideon. So we're going to talk more about this next week when we close up the webinar series, but I wanted to leave you with a few slides on summarizing the encounter. And once you've developed that discrepancy, it's a good idea to summarize that conversation. And you can say something like, let me see if I understand what you told me, Emily. It's really important for you guys to have some nice family time where kids are happy and healthy, and you know that screen time isn't, a lot of screen time isn't really healthy for Gideon, and yet you know he gets a lot of joy out of it, and it's really important for you to see him happy, because it sounds like he doesn't get that joy out of some of these other activities. It also seems like you and your husband are ready to talk to Gideon about a path forward. Yeah. And then you might say, have you thought about what that conversation may look like? And that's where you can start moving so that when Emily leaves here today, she may actually have a way to do it. She's going to do it maybe next Thursday night when there's not a lot of activity, or maybe she's going to do it when it's just Gideon and Emily and not Violet and Kenny around, right? So these are some words that you could use to sum up the conversation. I love this one in the end. It says, did I get everything? Or how did I do? What have I missed? Anything you want to add or correct? And next week, Emily and I are going to go through a whole scenario, and I'll probably end with some of these because it's important when you sum up. It only can take 30, 60 seconds, but you want to make sure you've got it all correct. And if the patient is ambivalent about the issue, you can summarize both the pros and cons. So for M, she wasn't ambivalent. She was ready to make that change. But here you could say something like this for another example. So it sounds like you have several reasons why you want to quit eating fast food, Tori. On the other hand, there are things you like about eating at McDonald's. It's quick, it's easy, the kids like it. You're not sure you want to give these things up. And it also sounds like you're worried about what it would be like to not go to McDonald's. I wonder what you'll do. So that's a nice summing up there. And that's a nice way to leave it when somebody's ambivalent. So I know we've covered a lot today, and sorry if I rushed a bit, and sorry about my voice. Hopefully next week it will be better. Here's a homework assignment for you if you want. You can try practicing with a friend for 10 or 15 minutes. It has to be a real issue for the friend like it was for Emily here. Something that they would like to change but they are ambivalent about. And it could be going back to school, maybe having a baby, switching jobs, maybe a tough parenting issue. But it has to be real. And you want to use the prompts to help you remember how to change a question into reflection, or how to change a question into a closed question into an open-ended question. You can use our little flip chart that we have for those kinds of things. And here's the steps I'd like you to take. You first want to ask permission. Get used to asking permission. It takes a little while to get the words to come out correctly. You have to have your friend describe what the issue is, and you could use some open-ended questions to find out more about the issue. You want to reflect back the emotion you're hearing from your friend. You want to develop that discrepancy, pros and cons, using the ruler, transition to your friend's values, and try summing it up. So important here, you are not looking to solve the issue for your friend. Your friend may tell you something like, I really am thinking about having another baby. And you might feel so strongly whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. You are not looking to solve the issue. You are looking just to try these techniques that we've talked about over the last 4 weeks. So important, do not try to solve the issue. And for some of us, like Emily and myself, it's always really easy to jump in and think, I know how to do this one. I can help them. I really can. But that's not what you're going to do for this, this homework assignment. Lastly, I'd love any input from any of you guys who have tried the Change Talk app. Again, you can get that app at the App Store, and if you've tried it, you can chat in. We're going to leave the chat box open for 10 or 15 minutes. But let me know if you like it. It's a tool that was developed by the AAP, American Academy of Pediatrics. I work with them on this, and we're interested to see if it does help. So if you have any questions or comments, like I said, feel free to chat them in the box. We'll leave the webinar open, and we'll gather the questions and send any responses back later this week. You will all be getting copies of the slides if you haven't already. And then you're also, at the end of this, there'll be recordings of all of our webinars if you'd like to listen to, or any of your peers would. And also at the end of this, we're going to be sending out a survey, and I would love your thoughts on this. Constructive criticism is fantastic. This is the first time we've done this. I've reached out to a few folks along the way to get some feedback, so I really, really appreciate that. And thanks for listening today. See you next week, same time, same place, for the last webinar in the series where we'll talk about pulling this all together. Thank you for your time.